Growing up, my siblings never took me seriously. Every time I shared my dreams of becoming a writer, they laughed. "You'll never make a living off words," they'd say, their voices dripping with amusement. To them, I was just the quiet, awkward kid who wasted time scribbling in notebooks instead of doing something real. They didn't see the way my heart ached every time they dismissed me. They didn't notice the way my fingers trembled when I held my pen, doubting myself, because of their words. I tried to brush it off, tried to pretend their opinions didn't matter, but deep down, they did. Their words carved scars into my confidence, making me question whether I was truly capable of achieving my dreams. Family gatherings were the worst. They were supposed to be about love and togetherness, but for me, they were battlegrounds. My brother, a successful engineer, would pull up blueprints and talk about his latest project, earning nods of approval and admiration. My sister, a doctor, would regale everyone with stories of saving lives, basking in the praise of our relatives. Then they'd turn to me, their eyes gleaming with mischief, already anticipating the joke they were about to make. So, still playing. With words, my brother would ask, smirking, "What's your latest masterpiece? A poem about your feelings?" My sister would add with a chuckle. The whole room would erupt in laughter. I'd force a smile, swallow my pride, and nod. Every single time. But what hurt the most wasn't their words. It was the way my parents never defended me. My father would sigh and shake his head as if he was disappointed in my choices. My mother would pat my hand and say, "You should really think about a backup plan, dear. Writing is nice, but it's not practical." One particular evening still haunts me. It was my father's birthday, and our house was filled with relatives. Laughter and the aroma of delicious food filled the air. I had been dreading this night for weeks, knowing exactly what was coming. After dinner, my siblings began their usual bragging. My brother talked about a high-profile bridge project he was working on, earning gasps of admiration. My sister shared a dramatic story about a life-saving surgery, making our relatives hang on to her every word. Then, inevitably, they turned to me. "And what about you?" my uncle asked, his tone light but condescending. "What have you been up to?" I hesitated for a moment, debating whether to stay quiet or speak my truth, but something in me stirred. Had been working tirelessly on a novel, pouring my heart and soul into it. It was my proudest achievement, and I wanted to share it. "I'm writing a novel," I said, my voice steady but soft. A brief silence fell over the room. Then the laughter came. "Oh, that's adorable," my aunt cooed. "What's it about? A fairy tale?" My brother sneered. "Hopefully it's not about your tragic life as the family disappointment," my sister added. Chuckling, tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing myself to breathe. I wanted to scream at them, tell them how much their words hurt, how hard I was working. But I knew it would only give them more fuel. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, something inside me hardened. I realized that no amount of words could change their minds. I could beg for their approval, but it would never come. The only way to prove them wrong was to succeed. So I decided right then and there, wouldn't just write a book. I would write a masterpiece, and one day they would regret every single word they had ever spoken against me. The journey wasn't just difficult, it was brutal. They never saw what happened behind closed doors. They never saw the nights I stayed up until dawn, my fingers cramping from hours of writing, my eyes stinging from exhaustion. They never heard the self-doubt that whispered in my mind, echoing their laughter. Each rejection felt like a slap. Each "we regret to inform you" email chipped away at my confidence. I would stare at my computer screen, my heart sinking as yet another publisher dismissed my manuscript. I lost count of how many times I nearly gave up. How many times I told myself they were right, maybe I wasn't good enough. But every time I reached that breaking point, I thought about that night at my father's birthday. The way they laughed, the way they dismissed me. I used that pain to fuel me. I worked harder. I studied writing like my life depended on it. I read books on storytelling, dissected bestsellers, learned the art of crafting words that could move people. I rewrote my novel from scratch twice, and yet, The struggle wasn't just external. I lived paycheck to paycheck, working odd jobs to keep my dream alive. I worked as a barista serving coffee to people who had real jobs. I edited resumes for corporate professionals who looked at me with pity when I mentioned I was a writer. I freelanced for pennies, writing articles that barely covered my rent. My parents grew more concerned. "Maybe it's time to be realistic," my father said one evening. "Your brother and sister were already successful at your age. You need stability. You can always write as a hobby," my mother added gently. A brief silence fell over the room. Then the laughter came. "Oh, that's adorable," my aunt cooed. "What's it about? A fairy tale?" my brother sneered. "Hopefully it's not about your tragic life as the family disappointment," my sister added. Chuckling, tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing myself to breathe. I wanted to scream at them, tell them how much their words hurt, how hard I was working. But I knew it would only give them more fuel. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, something inside me hardened. I realized that no amount of words could change their minds. I could beg for their approval, but it would never come. The only way to prove them wrong was to succeed. So I decided right then and there, I wouldn't just write a book, I would write a masterpiece. And one day, they would regret every single word they had ever spoken against me. I forced a smile and nodded, but inside my heart screamed. They still didn't believe in me. They never wouldn't unless I gave them a reason to, so I kept going. I wrote through exhaustion, through hunger, through the weight of their doubt pressing down on me. And then one day, something changed. I got an email. Not just any email, an acceptance letter. A major publishing house had read my manuscript and loved it. They wanted to publish it. They were offering me a 6-figure deal. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. After all the years of struggle, of doubt, of pain, my dream was finally real. And I knew in that moment that I wasn't just doing this for me. I was doing it for every time they had laughed at me, for every family gathering where I had felt invisible, for every moment they had made me feel like I was less. And soon they were going to see exactly what I had accomplished. On my terms, I spent months working with the publisher, fine-tuning my novel. The moment I held the first printed copy in my hands, I felt an overwhelming rush of emotions, joy, relief, and the undeniable hunger for what was to come next. The book launched, and the response was explosive. Within weeks, it climbed the bestseller charts. Readers connected with my words, with the raw emotions I had poured onto every page. Reviews flooded in, praising the depth of the story. Interviews followed. I was invited onto talk shows, podcasts, and literary panels. People wanted to hear my journey, my struggles, my victories. Then came the moment I had been waiting for, the official book tour's announcement. One of the cities on the list, my hometown, and one of the stops, a high-profile bookstore just minutes away from my childhood home. It was perfect. I made sure my family received invitations to the event. No explanations, no pleas for approval. It's just an invitation to witness what I had become. The day of the book signing arrived, and the bookstore buzzed with excitement. Readers lined up clutching copies of my novel, eager to meet the author. Air smelled of fresh ink and paper, and the large promotional poster with my name and book cover stood tall at the entrance. Then they walked in. My parents, my brother, my sister. They hesitated at the doorway, their eyes scanning the packed store. I could see the disbelief on their faces, the realization that I had done what they thought was impossible. I didn't acknowledge them at first. I greeted my readers, signed books, and answered questions. I let them witness the admiration in people's eyes, the genuine respect in their voices when they spoke to me. I let them hear my name spoken with praise, not mockery. When the event ended, they approached. My father cleared his throat. "We had no idea," he began, but his voice trailed off. My mother's eyes glistened. "We're proud of you," she whispered. My brother and sister remained silent, the weight of their past words hanging between us. For the first time, they weren't laughing. They weren't dismissing me. I took a deep breath and simply said, "I know." Because I didn't need their approval anymore. I had already won. As the bookstore emptied and the last of my fans left with signed copies in their hands, I sat at the signing table, staring at my family. For years, I had imagined this moment, how it would feel to finally have them acknowledge me. But now that it was here, it wasn't what I expected. They had come, yes. They had seen my success, yes. But their words, their apologies, their sudden admiration, did it change anything? Did it erase the years of ridicule, the lonely nights, the moments of doubt they had planted in me? No, and I didn't want it to. I leaned back in my chair, watching them fumble for words. My mother dabbed at her eyes. My father shifted uncomfortably. My siblings avoided my gaze. They weren't mocking me anymore, but they weren't celebrating with me either. They didn't know how, and that was their burden to bear, not mine. I stood up, gathering my things. "Thank you for coming," I said simply. No anger, no bitterness, just a quiet strength they had never expected from me. My mother reached for my hand. "We should talk more," she said softly. I smiled, a small, knowing smile. Maybe. Then I turned and walked away, stepping into the life I had built for myself. Asterisk, a life where their opinions no longer defined me. A life where I was enough. And that was the greatest revenge of all.